The camera on Hemlock Knob Tower recorded a man standing at the alley-dade table inside the locked cab at 3:51 in the morning on March 19th. The cab floor sits 49 feet above the ground. The only route to it is 81 steel steps in a caged stairway. And the gate at the bottom of that stairway carried a numbered seal, 41792, which I cut off myself with bolt cutters 4 days later. It was the same number the Bureau of Forestry logged when they sealed the stairway in October. I'm a certified forensic video analyst. In plain terms, I get paid to look at a recording and sign my name to whether it shows what it appears to show. Since 2019, I've held a contract with the Pennsylvania Bureau of Forestry, Forest District 15, authenticating footage from 19 wildfire detection cameras across the northern tier. $82,000 a year. The health insurance rides on it, and the insurance rides on my certification staying current with the state licensing board. The reason the frames mattered on a clock instead of on a shelf is that Gene Sippel's Volunteer Restoration Committee had a work permit to be standing at that same alley-dade table on March 28th. 9 days out. 6 men in their 60s hauling up conduit and a replacement window sash for the county's bicentennial relighting. The alley-dade table is the round wooden table in the center of a fire tower cab. It holds a brass sighting ring you turn like a lazy Susan to read the compass direction of a smoke column. Ours was manufactured in 1939 and had not been turned on purpose since the Eisenhower administration. The figure appeared in 11 consecutive frames, which at our capture rate of 1 frame every 6 seconds works out to a fraction over 1 minute. He stood on the far side of the table with both hands resting on the ring, facing the west window. Canvas coat, dark, with a lighter patch on the left shoulder, no hat. He did not turn toward the camera. In frame 7, he leaned in as though reading something on the tabletop. And in frame 12, the cab was empty, and the dust on the table was exactly where it had been in frame 1. I want to be careful here about what I ruled out, because that is the whole job. First, I checked the file integrity. Every clip our system writes gets a hash, which is a long string of characters generated from the file's own contents, so that if a single pixel changes, the string changes with it. If somebody had opened that clip and painted a man into it, the string would not have matched the string logged at capture. It matched, character for character, all 64 of them. Second, I checked whether the camera had been fooled by something outside the glass. A reflection would have been reversed, and this figure's coat pocket stayed on the same side across all 11 frames. A reflection would also have moved with the light source, and the only light in the cab at 3:51 in the morning was a quarter moon low in the southwest. Third, I drove up there. That was the 23rd of March, out of Cootersport on Route 6, and then south on the District Road past the old Cobb Hollow Gate. I had a thermos of gas station coffee and a gray calibration card in my jacket pocket. 9 inches square, matte. The kind of neutral gray card you hold in front of a lens so the camera knows what true gray looks like. I'd used that same card since 2014. It had a coffee ring on the back corner and a soft crease where I'd once shut it in a truck door. The stair gate was chained, and the seal was whole. I photographed the number from 3 distances before I cut it. The padlock above it was original, a heavy 1940s brass shackled thing. And the shackle was bright, not polished bright, worn bright, the way a bolt gets when a hand touches it over and over for a long time. I noted that and moved on, and I've thought about it every week since. The stairway had 81 steps, and I counted them because that number appears in the tower's structural file. There was leaf litter and a gray dust on the treads, undisturbed, with mouse tracks running the width of the 14th step. I laid the calibration card flat on that step and took a scale photograph. Nothing human had come up or down those stairs since the fall. The cab was hot for March, and it smelled like a fireplace that had been cold for a week. I attributed that to the creosote in the old sash paint. The 2 windows on the west side were painted shut. The trapdoor hatch in the floor was latched from the inside, which is only possible if the last person outlatched it and then left by the stairs, which is what the 1996 closure report says happened. I checked the camera itself last. Our units log a vibration channel, a little accelerometer that records shakes so that we can throw out frames ruined by wind. Anything walking on a steel platform 49 feet up shows on that channel like a hammer. I pulled the log for the whole night of March 19th. Wind spikes at 11, wind spikes at 2. Between 3:30 and 4:15, the flattest trace on the whole file. Nobody walked up. Nobody walked on the platform. The seal was intact, the dust was intact, and the file was unaltered. That is 4 independent things, all saying the same thing. And I have testified in Commonwealth Court, unless. While I had the housing open, I photographed the camera's configuration sheet, which is a laminated card zip-tied inside every unit. It lists the lens, the firmware, and the mask table. A mask is a piece of the camera's field of view we tell the software to ignore, so it stops reporting the same false alarm forever. Wood stoves, quarries, a farmer's burn barrel. Hemlock Knob had 1 mask. Azimuth 238 degrees through 244 degrees, entered in 1996, reason code 11, chimney. 6 degrees is not much of a wedge on paper. On the ground, at a distance of 5 miles, 6 degrees is about half a mile wide. I know that country. I have walked the Cobb Hollow side of that ridge with a rangefinder in my hand. There is no chimney on that bearing. There is no house, no camp, no sugar shack, no burn barrel. I checked it properly instead of trusting my memory. Potter County publishes its address points and its aerial imagery, and the county assessment office will hand you a parcel map for $4. From the tower on a bearing of 241 degrees, the first structure of any kind is a Baptist church in Sweden Valley, 11.5 miles out and 400 feet below the sight line. Nothing burns in between. Nothing has ever been permitted to burn in between. So I had a mask with no reason to exist and a man with no way to be there in 8 days. Love impossible evidence and slow burn horror? Subscribe to Mr. CreepVault and share your theory. I reply to every comment. Now, back to the case. I drove to the district office in Coudersport on the 24th, a Monday, and asked Dale Prosser for the mask history. Dale is the district forester. He has been in that chair 11 years and has 4 to go before he can retire with a full number. "You want the history on a mask," he said. He had a mug and a stack of grant forms, and he did not sit down. "Riva, the detection grant renewal is due in June. Do you know what our false positive rate has to be? Under 2%. Under 2%. He set the mug on the forms. Masks are how we get under 2%. I told him I wasn't asking him to remove it. I said I needed to know who entered it and what they were looking at. Because whatever it wasn't a chimney. And I had a work crew going up that tower on Friday. He asked me if the footage showed a person. I said the footage showed a figure at the Aladade table, and that I could not authenticate it as anything else, because everything that would let me call it an artifact had already failed. I laid the 4 tests out for him in order, and I gave him the seal number. Dale listened all the way through, which I gave him credit for at the time. Then he said the frames were probably an insect on the lens dome, warmed by the housing, and that it happens more than people think. "An insect that has a shoulder patch," I said. An insect that has whatever your eye decides it has at 3 in the morning. He picked the mug back up. Write it as inconclusive and I'll put it in the file. I told him I don't write inconclusive when I have a hash match. He said the walkthrough for the network expansion was Wednesday, that Corinne Bly could handle the camera sighting on her own, and that he'd let me know if he found the mask paperwork. Then he told me my contract came up for renewal in July. And he said it the way a man says the time of day. That is what the ask cost me. The walkthrough was 3 days of billable work and the only part of the job where I get to choose where camera points. I have not been asked to a sighting walkthrough since. I went back to my office over the hardware store in Gallatin that afternoon and did the thing I should have done first, which was to stop looking at March 19th and look at everything else. Our archive keeps 5 years of full-rate frames and 15 years of motion-triggered clips. I wrote a script that pulled every clip from Hemlock Knob where the cab interior showed a shape taller than 30 inches. And I ran it against 9 years of the nights. The system had flagged none of them, because the cab interior is in a smoke detection zone, and nobody had ever had a reason to look inside the room the camera is bolted to. It gave me 4, April 2nd, 2021, 3:51 in the morning, 9 frames, the figure at the table with both hands on the brass ring. March 28th, 2022, 3:51, 7 frames, same. April 19th, 2023, 3:51, 12 frames. Same, except in the 6th frame, he was standing back from the table with his arms down, the way a man stands when he's waiting for somebody to answer him. And March 22nd of last year, 3:51, 6 frames. Same minute of the same clock, 4 years running, in a room nobody can enter, all of them in the second half of March or the first 3 weeks of April. I checked the older motion clips too, the 15-year set, and found nothing. And it took me a while to understand why. The camera was replaced in 2020. Before that, the housing had a fixed sunshade that cut the top of the frame, and the top of the frame is where the tabletop sits. The old camera could not have seen the Alidade table if a brass band had been playing on it. I installed the new unit myself in June of 2020. I chose the mount height. I held that gray card up in front of the lens on the platform in a light rain and set the white balance. And I remember being pleased, because the new bracket cleared the sunshade and gave me 11 degrees more sky. I called Gene Sipple that night to move his Friday. Gene is 67, a retired ironworker out of Austin, and he had spent 2 years getting that tower on the county's bicentennial list. He wanted it lit for one weekend in July, with a crowd underneath it and his grandkids on the steps. He was not interested in Friday moving. Give me a reason, Reva. The stairway's sealed and I don't have paper clearing it. You cut the seal Sunday. I saw your truck. He let that sit. What's actually up there? I told him I had frames I couldn't explain and that I'd have an answer inside a week. He laughed at me, not meanly. He told me his father took him up Hemlock Knob in 1964, and the warden let him turn the brass ring. And then he said the thing that turned the whole case over in my hands. And he said it as a pleasant memory, the way you'd mention a smell from a grandmother's kitchen. You know what I remember? That cab always smelled like a wood stove in the spring, every March, warm as a kitchen and no stove in it since Truman. I asked him who else remembered that. Everybody, he said. That's why we always went up in March. Only time of year you can see clear across to Dorn Ridge. Dorn Ridge is not on any map the Bureau of Forestry uses today, and I spent most of March 25th learning that the hard way. The ridge is printed on the topographic sheet. The tower Gene Sipple remembered looking at from the Hemlock Knob cab is not printed anywhere at all. Our detection grid has a layer called tower points. 19 of them, all active, each with coordinates good to about 3 feet. Dorn Ridge isn't in it. It isn't in the historic overlay either, because the historic overlay only goes back to 1974, when the state converted from paper cards to something a computer could read. So I went to the cards. District 15 keeps them in the basement of the Cootersport office, in 4 green file drawers that smell like a church basement in August, and I still had my badge that week. Each tower has an occupancy card. It lists erection year, steel manufacturer, cab dimensions, and a line called occupancy status, with entries added by hand over the decades. I read all 19. 18 of them read the same general way. Staffed seasonally through the 1960s, staffed intermittently in the 70s, closed to routine occupancy in 1981 when the state went to aerial detection, then reopened for maintenance access. Hemlock Knob's card is different. And it is different in a way that took me about 4 seconds to see and 4 weeks to understand. Erected 1939. Air motor steel, 39-foot base. Cab 7 feet by 7 feet. It is the newest tower in the district by 6 years. Under occupancy status in Fountain Pen. Closed to human occupancy 1942. Structural deficiency. Then nothing else for 82 years except maintenance notations in 4 different hands. A tower that was 3 years old was condemned for its structure and never repaired and never taken down. And the state kept climbing it to change light bulbs for the next 8 decades. I have written enough insurance-adjacent reports to know what a real structural deficiency looks like on paper. It comes with a load calculation and a photograph of a bad weld. There was no load calculation in the drawer. There was no engineer's name. I photocopied the card, both sides, and put $2 in the coffee can by the machine because that is the rule in that office. Then I drove out to Cobb Hollow to find Corinne Bly because I needed somebody who understood how the Bureau plants trees and because I could not stand to read another card without saying any of it out loud. Corinne is 44 and carries the title Forest Mapping Specialist, which means she inventories what is growing, where, and how old it is. She had a state truck parked at the top of the salvage landing with the tailgate down and a laptop on it. And she was eating a sandwich in a wind that was running maybe 20 miles an hour out of the northwest. The salvage cut was the first time I saw it as a shape instead of as a line item. Last November, a timber sale took out a block of white pine, 41 acres, on the southwest shoulder below Hemlock Knob. The stumps were still bright. Whoever ran the harvester had left the slash in windrows, long low piles of limbs and tops running downhill. And the whole thing was open to the sky, where 9 months ago it had been a wall of green. "You want the plantation records?" Corinne said, before I'd finished asking. "You're the 3rd person this year." I asked who the other 2 were. "A logger and me." She turned the laptop toward me. The logger called in October because the block didn't make sense to cut. And it didn't make sense to plant, either. She showed me what she meant. A pine plantation gets laid out along the contour, meaning the rows follow the level of the hillside, because that's how you keep soil from washing and how you get a machine in and out. Everything the Bureau planted in that district from 1934 forward runs along the contour. You can see it from the air, like corduroy wrapped around a hill. The Cobb Hollow block ran the other way. Straight up over the top of the ridge and down the far side, 160 feet wide, dead straight for 1 mile and 3/10. The logger's exact complaint, Corinne said, was that it ran the wrong way, straight up over the top. He'd never seen the state do that. He thought it was a survey line somebody planted by mistake in the 30s and nobody ever fixed. I asked her what she thought. "I think nobody plants a mile of pine by mistake." She wrapped the rest of her sandwich. "It's in my project. I've got 400 plantations mapped, and 11 of them make no silvicultural sense. And I can't get the project funded past September because it isn't a deliverable anybody's grant asked for." That was what Corinne wanted, and it had nothing to do with me. She wanted somebody to pay her to finish counting trees that were planted for reasons the state had forgotten. I asked her if she could find the original planting map for Cobb Hollow. She said the planting maps for the 40s were in the same basement I'd just come out of, in a flat file, and that she'd pull it when she was in Monday. I drove home to Gallatin and did the thing I'd been circling for 2 days without letting myself land on it. I opened my own billing folder for last year and found the memo. Sightline obstruction assessment, Hemlock Knob Tower, Forest District 15. 4 pages. My letterhead, my certification number, my signature, dated August 14th. I had written that the southwest quadrant of the Hemlock Knob camera's field of view was obstructed between azimuth 220 and azimuth 260 by a mature white pine plantation. That the obstruction reduced usable detection coverage by roughly 11%, and that the Bureau should consider removal of the block to restore the quadrant. I recommended it. I put a number on it. 11%. The salvage sale went out in September. They cut it in November. My invoice for that memo was $3,100, and I remember being glad about it, because my truck needed tires. Nobody made me write that. I looked at a hillside and a coverage map, and I gave the correct professional opinion. And it was correct. That is the part I have not found a way around. The next morning, I went looking for people instead of paper, because paper was starting to tell me things about myself. Potter County coroner's records are public for the asking, and the county keeps a bound index by year. I asked for anything on Hemlock Knob Tower and got 3. 1942. A lookout, age 19. Residence Ulysses. Found on the tower platform on the morning of April 12th. Cause of death, smoke inhalation. I'm not going to put his name in this because his sister is alive and lives in Wellsville and did not ask to be in anybody's story. 1978. Emmett Marchetti, 46, state maintenance worker. Found on the platform on March 30th. Cause of death, smoke inhalation, 1996. A contractor, name withheld by the district when I asked. Found on the platform on May 2nd, transported, survived. The intake wrote it as smoke inhalation. 3 cases, 54 years apart, end to end. And in each one the file has a blank where the fire ought to be. I pulled the state fire occurrence records for all 3 dates. There was no reported fire within 5 miles of that tower on April 12th of 1942, March 30th of 1978, or May 2nd of 1996. Nothing within 11 miles on 2 of the 3. Potter County burns in April. It does not burn quietly and secretly on the exact day somebody dies of smoke on one particular platform. All 3 dates fall between March 11th and May 6th. So do all 5 sets of frames I had by then. I built the window out of that. Earliest event, March 19th. Latest, May 6th, which I got from a 4th thing I found later and will come back to. 8 events across 82 years, and not one of them in June, and not one in January. Then I drove to Sweden Valley to see Hollis Renck, who was the elected coroner of this county for 29 years, and who signed the 1978 certificate himself. He is 78. He had a kitchen table with a plastic cloth on it and a percolator going at 4 in the afternoon. And he read my photocopy of Emmett Marchetti's certificate, holding it at arm's length. And then he set it face down. "You've been in the basement," he said. I said I had. Then you know how many towers got closed for structure in 1942? One. One. He poured me coffee I didn't ask for. I'm not going to help you. And I want you to understand that I'm not being coy about it. Junie Marchetti gets $1,140 a month because that certificate says smoke inhalation in the course of employment. She's 81. She has that and Social Security. I said I wasn't asking him to change a certificate. You're asking me to say a sentence out loud. He sat down across from me. If I say it, somebody eventually writes it down. And then some lawyer for the Commonwealth reopens a 1978 comp claim. And Junie's benefit is a question instead of a check. I'm not doing that to her at 81. I asked him if what he wrote was true. He looked at me for a long moment. And I want to be fair to him here, because he did answer. I wrote that Emmett died of smoke inhalation, he said. That's true. He had soot in his airway, and his blood carried carbon monoxide at 52% saturation. I measured it. I testify to it tomorrow. And the fire? There wasn't one. He picked the percolator up and put it back down without pouring anything. That's the part that isn't on the form. There's no line on the form for that. He would not go further. He told me to close his door on the way out. And he told me one other thing while I was standing in it, which was that the tower stairway had been sealed by the district every spring since he could remember and unsealed every June. And that nobody had ever put that in writing either. I called Gene Sipple that night and told him to keep his crew off Hemlock Knob until after the second week of May. That's the bicentennial planning meeting, he said. That's the whole timeline. I said I understood. Then give me the reason. I could not. Everything I had was a photocopy of a card. A coroner who would not speak, my own signature on a memo that helped cause this, and 11 frames of a man in a canvas coat. If I said the word carbon monoxide to a man planning a public event on state property, the district would have my contract in July, and the licensing board would have my certification in October. And I knew it while I was on the phone with him. So I said the stairway was sealed and that Dale Prosser had issued a stop work that afternoon, which was true. Dale had cut a new seal onto that gate the day after I cut the first one, and he had emailed me a copy of the number, and he had not answered any of my 4 questions about the mask. Gene was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You know what I think? I think you found something worth money, and you don't want the committee's name on it." I told him that wasn't it. 67 years I've lived in this county, he said. I've never had a state contractor tell me a tower was unsafe and then not tell me how. He hung up. That was March 29th. We did not speak again for 11 days. And the next time I heard his voice, it was through an oxygen mask. On April 2nd, at some time before 4 in the morning, Gene Sipple parked his truck at the Cobb Hollow gate, walked up the district road with a coil of 14-gauge wire over his shoulder, cut Dale Prosser's seal with a hacksaw, and climbed the 81 steps alone to pull a wire run he'd been planning since February. One of his crew found him at 7:15. On his knees at the alidade table with both hands still on the brass ring. Austin Fire got a stair rescue up there by 8:40. His blood carbon monoxide read 41% at the hospital in Cootersport. There was no fire on that mountain. There was no fire within 11 miles of it. The palms of both his hands were burned. Gene Sipple's palms were burned in a pattern, and the pattern was a circle. I saw it on April 3rd in the hospital in Cootersport. Both hands turned up on the blanket, a curved band of blister across each palm, about 5/8 of an inch wide. The brass sighting ring on a 1939 alidade table is 5/8 of an inch wide. He was on a nasal cannula and he was angry at me in a way that had nothing left in it. "There wasn't any smoke," he said. "I want that on the record with you, since you're the one who keeps records. I could smell it. I couldn't see it." I asked him what the temperature was. "Hot." He worked his jaw. "Hot like standing at a burn barrel." My glasses fogged, Reva. Outside, it was 38 degrees. Then he told me the part I had not asked for and had not thought to ask for. And it was the first-hand account anybody had given me of the thing itself. There was a fella at the table. I asked what he was wearing. "Work coat, duck canvas." Gene lifted 2 fingers toward his own left shoulder. "Patch here, lighter than the rest." He asked me a question, and I couldn't hear it, and my hands were on the ring by then, and I don't remember putting them there. I asked him what he thought the question was. How would I know? He shut his eyes. It was the same tone as a man on the radio asking for something routine, like asking for a number. His crew chief was in the room. There is no version of that conversation that keeps me clean, so I'll state it plainly. Gene Sipple told me he intended to go back up once the doctors cleared him, because the committee had a July date, and because he did not accept that a place his father had taken him at 10 years old was going to kill him at 67. I told him he'd die. He told me I had no mechanism, no report, and no permission to say that. And he was right about all 3. I could not prove him wrong. I still can't. What I have is that he never did climb it again, and the reason wasn't me. Corinne Bly called me at 4 o'clock that same afternoon and said she had the flat file open and I needed to be in the basement before the office locked at 5. I made it in 40 minutes. She had the 1942 planting map weighted flat with 2 staplers. Linen-backed, pencil and ink, District 15. And it showed the Cobb Hollow block exactly as she described it from the air. A straight ribbon, 160 feet wide, running up over the ridge and down. Dead across the contour, labeled in a draftsman's hand. The label did not say plantation. It said visual screen. And under that, Per Warden Q. And under that, a note in the same hand, maintain full height. Do not thin. Ansel Q was the district fire warden from 1938 to 1961. He died in 1989. Corinne had his name in her project already because 11 plantations in her list of 400 carried it. "There's more," she said, and put a second sheet next to it. It was a 1941 dispatch log page, and it had been filed with a map instead of with the dispatch records, which is why nobody had matched them in 83 years. 2 cross-shot cards were stapled to it. A cross-shot card is what a fire tower fills out when it sights a smoke. The tower's name, the time, and the azimuth, meaning the compass direction in degrees, so that a dispatcher can draw 2 lines from 2 towers and call the crossing point the fire. Card 1, Hemlock Knob Tower, October 29, 1941. 15:10 hours, azimuth 241 degrees. Card 2, Dorn Ridge Tower, same date, 15:11 hours, azimuth 61 degrees. Across the log page, in red pencil, someone had written, "Fix indeterminate," and beside it, towers sighting each other. 241 and 61 are the same line read from opposite ends. 61 plus 180 is 241. Each tower had looked at the smoke and reported a bearing that pointed straight at the other tower. There was no crossing point. 2 lines lying on top of each other cross everywhere, which in practice means nowhere. The dispatcher could not put a dot on the map, so he stamped it indeterminate. And the position of whatever they were both looking at was recorded as a line 1 3/10 miles long instead of as a place. I sat down on a step stool in that basement and asked Corinne to say the mask numbers to me. 238 through 244. 241 degrees is the exact center of the masked wedge. Somebody in 1996, the same year a contractor came off that platform poisoned, went into the camera software and told it to ignore 6 degrees of the world with the Dorn Ridge sightline sitting dead in the middle, and typed reason code 11, chimney, because there's no reason code for this. The plantation ran up over the ridge on that same bearing, 160 feet wide, which at a mile is more than enough to blind 2 cabs to each other. Q did not write a memo. He planted a mile of white pine across the line of sight and wrote, "Maintain full height." And it held for 82 years. And then a forensic video analyst looked at a coverage map and recommended taking it down for 11%. The log page named the fire crewman. Orrin Tesler, hired that fall at 32 cents an hour, sent up the Cobb Hollow side on October 29th to scout a slow ground fire and not accounted for at dark. Beneath his name on the attached payroll strip was a second name, crossed out with a single ink line, still legible enough to read 4 letters of and no more. Corinne photographed it. Neither of us has ever found out who that was or why the line was drawn. We went out to the block the next morning with an increment borer, which is a hollow drill you turn by hand into a tree to take a pencil-thin core so you can count the rings without cutting anything. The harvester had left an edge row standing along the property line. I bored a pine at 4.5 feet up and got 82 rings, plus 4 years of what a forester calls establishment, which puts the seedlings in the ground in the spring of 1942. The lookout died on that platform on April 12th of 1942. The trees went in that same season. The tower was condemned for structural deficiency that same year, with no engineer's name on the card. Q closed the tower, sealed the stairs, and planted the screen inside a few weeks of a 19-year-old boy dying. And then he did the arithmetic that everybody after him kept doing, which is that a tree is easier to defend in a hearing than a sentence is. I climbed the tower alone on April 5th to look at the Alidade table with all of this in my head, and that is where I found the last piece. The brass sighting ring turns inside a fixed collar, and on the ring's vane there are small raised stops, machined tabs that click into notches so a lookout can hold a bearing steady in wind. Every air motor Alidade of that vintage has stops at even intervals. On ours, 2 of them had been filed flat, not broken. Filed with a fine file, deliberately, and the brass in the filed spots had 80 years of oxidation on it, so it was done long ago. I measured the ring's circumference and counted notch positions, and worked out which 2 were gone. 61 degrees and 241 degrees. Somebody removed the ability to lock that instrument onto either end of that line. 1 stop for each endpoint. I have never been able to decide whether that was Q or the boy who died or the man in 1978. And I've never found paper on it. And it is the one thing in this case I'm at peace with not knowing. I wrote the rule out that night at my kitchen table, in pencil, on a legal pad, and it has not needed a correction since. The line between the 2 cabs is live only when the 2 cabs can physically see each other. That requires bare branches, which in Potter County means after the last hard snow squalls and before the leaves come out. And it required, until last November, that no conifer screen stood in the way. Nothing appears on the ground or on the stairs, ever, in 82 years of records. It appears at instrument height at one end or the other, because that is where the line meets the steel. Anything standing at an endpoint while the line is live gets the conditions of October 29, 1941, which is heat, smoke, and carbon monoxide with no fire anywhere on the mountain. It has never appeared in fog, It has never appeared in a snow squall. It stops when the leaves close. Green up in that country runs the first week of May. The 1996 case was May 2nd. The latest date in 82 years is May 6th, which is a note on the 1996 occupancy card in the fourth hand, reading screen effective, no further reports after 5/6. On April 6th, I was 31 days from green up, and I had the pattern complete and the cause nowhere in sight. And I still had a job for about 2 more hours. Dale Prosser called me into Cootersport and had the district's regional safety officer on speaker. And he told me what he needed. And to his credit, he did not pretend it was anything but what it was. I need the March 19th frames authenticated as sensor artifact, he said. Thermal artifact in the housing dome. There's language for it. I asked him what he was going to do with that. Close the tower for structural evaluation. Indefinite. Pull the bicentennial permit. He had the mug again, and this time he sat. Reva, that's what you want. That's the outcome you've been chasing since March. I'm handing it to you. He was not wrong, and that is what made it hard. If I signed one paragraph, the stairway would be shut for good, and Jean's committee would be off it, and nobody would stand at that table in April again. And the grant would renew clean, because a sensor artifact is not a false positive. I asked what happens to Dorn Ridge Tower. There was a pause on the speaker, and Dale said Dorn Ridge came down in 1951. I told him it hadn't. I'd been at the base of it on April 4th. The steel is standing, the cab is gone from the waist up, and the Alley-Dade pedestal is still bolted to the deck at 44 feet. And you can see Hemlock Knob from it now that the pines are down. The safety officer asked me to repeat that. Dale asked me to leave the room. I would not sign it. I told him a hash match and 11 frames are not an artifact, and that if I wrote that sentence with my certification number under it, and somebody died on that platform in 2029, my false statement would be the only document anybody found. By Friday, Corinne Bly had a reassignment letter to Clearfield County, effective in 3 weeks, with her plantation project unfunded and closed. Her records request for the 11 other Q plantations came back marked no responsive documents. My basement access was revoked the same afternoon. I still have the badge, and it opens the front door and nothing else. What I did not have and could not get was any way to convert that line into a point. That is the only thing that closes an indeterminate fix. 2 bearings on the same line give you nothing. You need a third bearing from somewhere off the line, taken at the same moment. And a bearing has to be taken from the end point of a sight line that only exists at instrument height, in the dark, at 3:51 in the morning. Which meant the only person who could take it was somebody willing to stand in the cab and read the ring aloud while the air went to 140 degrees. A third bearing needs 2 people and 1 clock. And the only person in Potter County who understood what I was asking was the one who had already told me he would not say the sentence out loud. I went back to Hollis Rank's kitchen on April 8th with the 2 1941 cards in a folder, and I did not ask him to say anything. I laid the cards face up on the plastic cloth, and the log page with the red pencil on it, and I put my legal pad next to them with the rule written out in 8 lines. And then I sat back and drank the coffee he poured without asking. He read for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on his stove. 61 and 241, he said. Same line, read from both ends. So there's no dot. He set the card down square with the edge of the table. They never found him. 1941, they searched 9 days and quit. And the reason they quit is in your hand. They had no place to look. They had 1 mile and 1/3 of ridge and a war coming. I told him what I wanted. One man at the county radio site on Windfall Hill with a hand compass and a phone. At 3:51 in the morning, taking a bearing on whatever he could see across at Hemlock Knob at the exact second I read a bearing off the ring in the cab. Windfall Hill is 4.5 miles northeast, and it sits well off the line, which is the whole point. 2 lines from off the line will cross at a place. You're going to stand in that cab. Yes. Emmett Marchetti was 46 and built like a door. Hollis put both hands flat. 52%. That's a coin flip on a good day in a hospital. And Cooter Sport's 22 minutes from that gate with a fire truck behind you. I told him I had a plan for that, and I laid it out. And because I had spent 3 days on it. And it was the only part of this I ever felt competent about. 4 gas meter clipped to my collar. The kind gas utility crews wear. Alarming at 35 parts per million of carbon monoxide. A half-face respirator with the wrong cartridges for carbon monoxide and the right ones for particulate, which I brought anyway. A timer set for 120 seconds. 2 men from Austin Fire at the gate, told only that I was doing a night camera calibration in a condemned structure, which was true, and which was also the smallest truth I have ever told a person wearing a badge. And you'll be up there, how long? 2 minutes on the platform, 90 seconds in the cab. Hollis got up and stood at his sink with his back to me for a while. His yard had a bird feeder in it, and a folding chair and a stack of firewood under a tarp. I was 32 years old in 1978, he said. I stood on that platform at 10 in the morning, and there was soot on the west window glass on the inside. Inside, Riva. I wiped it with my thumb. And there was no stove, no lantern, no candle, and no fire in the county. And I went down those steps, and I wrote smoke inhalation, and I did not write the word soot anywhere on any form. I asked him why. Because a form goes to Harrisburg. He turned around. And in 1978, Harrisburg would have sent an engineer, and the engineer would have found nothing. And they'd have reopened the tower, and the next spring, somebody's boy would have been up there with a radio. Q's trees were still standing then. The trees were the reason it only happened when somebody forced a door. I was not going to be the man who talked them into cutting the trees down to look for a defect. I said that I was. I know, he said. That's why I'm going to Windfall Hill. He set 2 conditions. He would give me numbers and nothing else. No opinion, no statement, no signature. And if the coordinates came out to a place, he would go to that place himself with the current coroner and not with me, because Junie Marchetti was 81 and lived 2 roads over and did not need to hear that a contractor had gone digging on her husband's account. We picked April 11th because the National Weather Service out of State College had it clear and cold. 34 degrees at 4 in the morning, wind under 5. And because after April 11th the red maples on that slope were going to start breaking bud, I got to the Cobb Hollow gate at 2:40 in the morning. The 2 men from Austin Fire were parked with their heater running, and one of them gave me a cup of coffee out of a gas station thermos, and I signed their sheet as the person entering. I want that on the record. I signed their sheet. That was the last document in this case that I filled out honestly. The stairway was cold and the steel rang. 81 steps. I counted them again out of habit and because counting is what I do with my hands when I don't want to think. At the second landing, 42 steps up, the temperature changed. I had a probe thermometer with a magnet on the back, and I stuck it to the stringer, and it read 51 degrees. Air temperature outside was 34. That is 17 degrees of nothing. At 3:44, I stepped onto the platform, which is a catwalk 2.5 feet wide running around the outside of the cab, 49 feet up, with a pipe handrail at 38 inches. I put my hand near the rail on the west side and pulled it back before I touched it. And then I put the probe against it. 142 degrees. That is coffee hot. That is hot enough to blister a palm in about 4 seconds, which is exactly what a 5/8 inch band of blister on Gene Sippel's hands looks like when a man grabs a brass ring and doesn't understand why. Air temperature at my collar on the same platform at the same second was 51. Nothing on that mountain was burning. There was no glow, no crackle, no light anywhere south except a farm light in Sweden Valley, 11.5 miles out. The smell came up through the platform grating. Wood smoke, hardwood, and under it the sharpness of green wood and leaf litter going, the smell of a ground fire in the fall. I have smelled that 100 times on prescribed burns. There was no haze in my headlamp beam. Not one particle. My meter was reading 14 parts per million of carbon monoxide and climbing about 1 part every 4 seconds. I went into the cab at 3:48. The door was not locked. Nothing at the top of that tower has ever been locked, because the gate at the bottom was the lock. Inside it was worse and quieter. The meter went from 22 to 31 in under a minute. My glasses fogged, the way Gene said his did, which is what happens when a lens at 34 degrees walks into air holding water at 100 and something. The gray card was in my jacket pocket where it always is. At 3:51, he was at the table. I am going to describe him the way I would describe him in a report, because that is the only way I have been able to hold it. Male, 5'9" or 10, 160 pounds. Dark hair cut short and high on the sides in the way men wore it before the war. Duck canvas work coat. Brown, with a lighter patch about 4 inches square on the left shoulder where the fabric had been replaced. Wool pants, lace boots. Both hands resting on the brass sighting ring. He did not shimmer, and he was not transparent. He blocked the west window behind him. He turned his head toward me, and he looked at my headlamp the way a man looks at a light that is too bright and does not know what it is. And he asked me for a bearing. I heard the words. They came at the volume of a man in a small room. And there was no radio in that cab, and no power in that tower, and there has not been since 1981. He said, "Give me a bearing." And then he said something with the word smoke in it that I could not separate. And then he said, "Give me a bearing" again. And his hands turned the ring maybe an inch. The ring did not move. I want to be precise. His hands moved and the ring stayed where it was, and dust that had been on the collar for years stayed in place. And I photographed that dust afterward against the card for scale. My timer was at 41 seconds. The meter alarmed at 35 and then went to 58. I put my hand on the ring beside his hands, and it burned me across the base of the fingers. And I read the number off the collar where the vein pointed, out loud, twice, into my phone with Hollis Rank on the line and the call recording. 263 degrees. 263 is not 61, and it is not 241. He was not sighting down the line at all. He was sighting at whatever he had been looking at in 1941, from wherever he actually was. And the number he gave me was the direction he was still trying to report. Hollis said back, in a voice with nothing in it, "Windfall Hill, 219 degrees, 3:51 and 40 seconds. He said it twice. He did not say another word. I got the camera's azimuth encoder to log both numbers with a timestamp by the crudest method available, which is that I said them aloud in front of a running camera whose clock is synced to a satellite. Then my timer hit 120 and I went out the door. The gray card was in my hand instead of my pocket. I don't remember taking it out. I had it up beside the ring for scale when I photographed the dust, and I carried it out of the cab. And on the platform, I looked at it, and the top edge had gone brown for about 3/16 of an inch, curled and blistered, the way paper goes when it has been near heat and not in it. 9 inches of gray card and 3/16 of it burned. I have the card. It is the only physical thing that came off that platform changed, and there is not one report in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that has a place to put it. I lost about a 1/4 inch of hair on the right side above my ear, and I did not notice until the next morning in a mirror. My meter's peak log read 71 parts per million. The men from Austin Fire said I came down the stairs fast and that I sat on the tailgate for 6 minutes before I could work the buckle on the meter strap. And one of them wrote, "Night calibration. No findings on their sheet." And I let him. The camera got all of it. 22 frames. A woman alone in a condemned cab, headlamp on, one hand on a brass ring, reading a compass number aloud to nothing, and no second figure anywhere in the frame at all. He does not photograph. 82 years of that camera's ancestors and 11 frames in 2024 and 9 in 2021. And every single one of them was taken when nobody was in the room. When I was in the room was empty except for me. That is the part I cannot file. Not the heat, not the smell, not the voice. The fact that the record shows a man at that table only when there is no witness, and shows a witness only when there is no man. And there is no test, I know, that resolves the two. I drove down to the Cooter Sport office parking lot at 5 in the morning and sat there with a plotting app and the 2 bearings, because I could not wait to be home. From Hemlock Knob's cab, 263 degrees. From Windfall Hill, 219 degrees. 2 lines from 2 places, 44 degrees apart, which is a strong crossing angle and gives a tight fix. They crossed at a point on the southwest shoulder of the ridge, 1 3/10 miles from the tower, at an elevation of 2,090 feet. I know that spot to the yard. It is inside the salvage cut. It is under the 3rd windrow of slash from the top, the long piles of limbs and tops the harvester left behind last November, on ground I stood on with Corinne Bly eating a sandwich in the wind. In the block, I put my signature on a memo recommending they remove. Hollis Rank kept his condition. I gave him the coordinates at 6 in the morning on April 12th, written on an index card. And I did not go with him. And I have never seen the ground where they dug. He called the sitting coroner, a woman named Paula Enfield, who took the office in 2013, and told her he had a 1941 missing person and a location. He did not tell her how he got it. She asked. He said a survey, and she let it go, because Hollis Rank had signed certificates in that county for 29 years, and because a coroner does not need a reason to look at ground. They went in on April 15th with the sheriff's office, and a state police corporal and 2 men with a mini excavator borrowed from the township. It took them 9 hours, most of it moving the slash windrow off the spot, which was 31 feet of limbs and tops piled 6 feet deep. The recovery report is public. I have a copy, and I have read it more times than is good for me. At a depth of 14 inches, in a natural depression that the report describes as a root throw hollow, meaning the pit left when a big tree tips over and its roots pull a wad of dirt out of the ground. They recovered a boot sole with square hobnails, a belt buckle, and bone, long bone, a partial pelvis, and a portion of a skull. The buckle was stamped with a Commonwealth property number, which the Bureau of Forestry issued to hand tools and equipment issued to seasonal crews in 1940 and 1941. And the number matched an issue line on the same payroll strip that carried Orrin Tesler's name at 32 cents an hour. Paula Enfield's finding was accidental death, undetermined date, probable 1941. Cause listed as undetermined, with a note reading consistent with entrapment. The anthropologist the state sent up from Erie put the age at 18 to 24 and the stature at 5'9". 82 years, 9 days of searching in 1941. And the reason nobody found him is that his position was filed as a line instead of a point. 2 towers looked at him, and both of them were right, and being right in 2 directions at once erased him. The fix was 340 feet from the edge of the plantation. If Q had planted his screen 40 rods wider, they would have hit the boot sole with a mattock in 1942. I need to be honest about what the recovery did and did not do, because that is the whole reason any of this cost what it cost. On the morning of April 16th, the day after the recovery, I had the Hemlock knob camera on my second monitor at 3:51. Clear night, 39 degrees. Leaves still 8 days out. The line wide open with the pines gone. Empty cab. Dust on the table. Nothing on the platform. I ran it again on April 18th and April 22nd, and every clear night through May 6th. And then I stopped, because the leaves had closed, and the test was meaningless after that. 14 clear nights inside the window, all of them with an open sight line, and not one frame with a man in it. The following March, I went back and ran it again, from the 12th of March to the 6th of May. 56 nights. 29 of them clear enough for the 2 cabs to see each other. And the pines were still down, and Dorn Ridge's pedestal was still bolted to its deck at 44 feet. Empty every time. I climbed it on April 9th of this year at 3:30 in the morning with the 4 gas meter and the 2 men from Austin Fire at the gate again. And I want to give you the numbers because the numbers are the only argument I have. Second landing, 36 degrees. Same as the outside air. Platform handrail, 35 degrees. Carbon monoxide, 0. No smell. I stood in that cab with my hand on the brass ring for 11 minutes, and the ring was cold enough to ache. An indeterminate fix closes when it becomes a point. That is the rule. And it is the only part of this where I got to see a thing I did all the way through to the end of it. What I could not do was write it down. Dale Prosser called me in on April 24th. He had the recovery report on his desk, and he had my April 11th footage, which he had every right to, because it lives on a Commonwealth server. 22 frames of his contractor alone in a condemned tower at 3:51 in the morning, reading a compass bearing out loud to an empty room. "You entered a structure under an active stop work," he said. I said I did. With a fire crew at the gate under a description that was not accurate. It was accurate. It was incomplete. He did not enjoy any of this. I've thought about that a lot. He had a grant renewal in June, 4 years to a pension, and a 1941 death certificate that had just landed in his district after 82 years with a state property number on the buckle. "Here's where we are," he said. "The tower gets closed. Permanently. Not for evaluation, for good. Stairway cut out at the second landing, gate welded, no permit, no bicentennial, no restoration committee. I've got the money for it under the same erosion line that's paying for the replant." I asked what replant. 160 feet wide, 1.25 miles across the contour. He turned a page around so I could see it. White pine and Norway spruce. It's written as an erosion control buffer on a steep salvage block, which is a real thing on a real slope, and it'll be through the review in July. Do not thin. Maintain full height. He had used Q's words without knowing they were Q's, or he had read the map. I never asked which. "And what do I sign?" "The March 19th frames and the April 11th frames as reflective and thermal artifact in the housing dome." There it was. He needed a document that closed a tower without ever saying why a tower needed closing. And the only person in the Commonwealth with the certification to write that sentence about that footage was me. I asked him about the 11 other Q plantations and about the other indeterminate fixes in the state, because I had asked Corinne to look before her access went away, and she had found 9 of them in the dispatch cards between 1936 and 1964, all stamped the same way, all in towers that could see each other. He said a list was being made and that it was not my list. I took 2 days. I have not tried to make myself look better in this account, and I won't start here. I thought about my certification, which comes up for renewal in October and requires a clean record with the state licensing board and no adverse findings from a client agency. I thought about the $82,000 and the health insurance, and the fact that I am 39 and have a mortgage of $940 a month on a house in Gaelton I bought when the market was reasonable. But that is not actually why I signed it. And I want to be exact, because if I let myself off with money, it stops being true. I signed it because Gene Sipple had a permit for July and 40 volunteers in a county that wanted its tower lit. And because the only lever in the world strong enough to stop that was a piece of paper with my number on it, saying the frames were nothing. The truth would have gotten the tower reopened. Harrisburg would have sent an engineer, exactly like Hollis said in 1978. And the engineer would have found sound steel, because the steel has always been sound. So on April 26th, I wrote 410 words, concluding that the anomalous figures recorded on the Hemlock Knob camera between 2021 and 2024 were consistent with reflective artifact originating in the housing dome, aggravated by thermal gradient, and that no human presence was recorded in the cab. I put my certification number under it. I dated it, and I sent it. Every clause in it is defensible, and the whole of it is a lie. And the lie will outlive me in a file drawer in Cootersport. The costs stated plainly. My contract was not renewed in July. Dale did not do that to punish me. The district restructured the authentication work to a firm in Harrisburg that bills by the clip, which is cheaper, and my scope of work ceased to exist. My certification lapsed in October because renewal requires 40 hours of continuing education and a sponsoring client. And I no longer had one. I work storm damage claims now for an insurance adjusting outfit out of Olean, New York, driving hail routes and photographing roofs. $41,000 a year and a family deductible of $6,000. Corinne Bly is in Clearfield County. Her plantation project is closed, and her records request for the Q blocks came back stamped no responsive documents, which she framed and hung in her office. She sends me a photograph every spring of a plantation that runs the wrong way. Last April, it was in Cameron County, up over a ridge, 160 feet wide. Gene Sipple never climbed the tower again. He told me in June that he decided the county could light something else, and he did not tell me why he changed his mind. And I did not ask, because I think the answer was in his hands. He died 2 years later, at 69, of pulmonary fibrosis. His obituary said he was an iron worker for 31 years, and that he restored the fire tower on Hemlock Knob, which is not what happened. And I sat in a folding chair in a church basement in Austin afterward, and ate ham on a paper plate and did not correct one person. Hollis Rank died in his sleep in December at 79. He never said the sentence out loud. Paula Enfield told me at the funeral that he called her every few weeks to ask whether anybody in Harrisburg had questions about the 1941 recovery. And she always told him no, and he always said good and hung up. Junie Marchetti is 83 and still gets $1,140 a month. Nobody reopened anything. That was the entire point. and it was Hollis's, and I have never been able to argue with it. Dale Prosser was promoted to a regional post in Harrisburg in September. The detection grant renewed. The buffer went in that fall. 11,000 seedlings, funded under erosion control. And the planting spec says maintain full height, do not thin. The stairway on Hemlock Knob was torch cut out at the second landing in August. So the bottom 42 steps go up and end in air. And the gate below it is welded, and there is no seal on it anymore, because there is nothing left to seal. I drove out there in November on my way to a hail route in Emporium. From the district road you can see the tower, and you can see the new seedlings, 12 to 16 inches tall, in rows going straight up over the ridge where they have no business going. It will take those trees 25 years to close that sight line. There is nothing standing at either end of the line to matter in the meantime, and Orrin Tesler is buried in Ulysses under his own name with a date on the stone. A man without a second angle isn't a person to a map. He's a direction. I keep the gray card taped inside the visor of my truck, above the seat, where it catches the sun on the north-south roads. 9 inches square, coffee ring on the back corner, crease from a truck door in 2016. The top 3/16 is brown and curled, and it has been shedding since April, a little at a time. So there's a fine dark grit in the crease of the visor and on the dash below it. I haven't wiped it out.